Hey there! Tonight we're going far back, not to palaces or marble statues lit by torches, but to a quiet, shapeless before time, when there were no cities, no temples, not even a sky to look up at, just the soft idea of a world that hadn't quite remembered itself yet. You might be in bed, already half under the blankets, or on the couch with the lights turned low, or maybe you're just letting this play in the background as you slowly put the day away. Wherever you are, let your shoulders drop a little. Let your breath even out. This is not an exam. This is a story meant to be heard the way the Greeks once watched the stars, absent-mindedly, peacefully, with a kind of sleepy curiosity. Around you, imagine a dim room. Maybe there's the hum of a fan, the faint rush of a car outside, or just the quiet tick of a clock counting out the time. Not the noisy kind of night with shouting and bright screens. No, this is the softer kind, where the world has finally decided to be a little less dramatic. Apparently, in Greek mythology, that didn't happen very often, so enjoy the contrast while you can. Tonight, we are going to drift through the entire arc of Greek mythology, from the first breath of chaos to the last quiet echoes of these myths in our own world. From a universe that begins as a single, formless presence called chaos, to Gaia, the earth, Uranus, the sky, and the long, complicated struggle that ends with Zeus on his throne, dividing the cosmos into sky, sea, and underworld. From there, we'll wander past gods and monsters, heroes and lovers, oracles and underworld gates, all the way to how these old stories still sit quietly behind our words, our art, and the way we think about fate. This will be a long, slow journey. You don't have to stay awake for all of it. In fact, you're strongly encouraged not to. If your mind drifts for a while in the middle of a Titan war or during yet another divine love triangle, that's not unusual in divine circles. The story will keep flowing underneath you, a steady current of names and places and small human worries dressed up in God-sized costumes. If you miss how Prometheus shapes humans from clay, or how Pandora opens her jar and leaves only hope behind, that's all right. If you wake up and have only a vague memory of a moody sea god, or a hero understandably distressed by a three-headed dog, that's fine too. The goal here is not perfect recall. The goal is comfort, a sense that the narrative is bigger than you, predictable in its own mythic way, and safe to fall asleep inside. We are, in any case, attempting something a little ambitious, to wander from chaos to the Olympians, from Heracles and Perseus and the Trojan War, through quiet household rituals and the shadowed roads of the underworld, and then out again into the world you live in now. Summarizing everything the Greeks ever imagined about gods and heroes in one night is admittedly a bold choice, but we'll take it slowly, step by step, letting each age of the story rise and fade like waves in the dark. So settle in, find a comfortable position, and let the myths unfold at their own unhurried pace. If you stay with the whole journey, you'll trace the full shape of this ancient world. If you fall asleep halfway through the creation of the cosmos, you'll drift with the gods anyway. Either way, you're exactly where you need to be, and we're ready to begin at the very beginning, with nothing at all.
So, before we rush into nothingness, let's quietly mark out the road you'll be walking. Tonight, we're going very far, but in a slow, straight line, from the first shiver of chaos to the last fading echo of the old gods in our modern world. We'll begin with beings who are not really people at all. No beards, no thrones, not yet. Just chaos, the open gap. Gaia, the wide earth. Dark Tartarus below, and the first hints of night and desire. From there, Sky himself, Uranus, presses down on Gaia, and their children, the Titans, grow up in the cramped dark between them, understandably distressed. The first part of your journey is this: how the world itself becomes a family argument. Then slowly, power changes hands. Kronos rises against his father, the Titans rule for a while, and Zeus eventually does the same to Kronos in turn. Apparently, in Greek mythology, overthrowing your parents is practically a career path. We'll follow the great war of gods and titans, the Titanomachy, but at an easy pace until the dust settles and Olympus becomes the new address of power. Zeus in the sky, Poseidon in the sea, and Hades in the underworld, each with their own quiet territory. Once the cosmos is divided, we'll meet the Olympians properly. Not as a list to memorize, but as characters you can drift past like constellations. You'll see Athena stepping out fully armed, Apollo and Artemis bringing light and shadow, Demeter guarding the fields, Aphrodite rising from sea foam, and a whole supporting cast of hearth goddesses, wine gods, and smiths at their forges. Not just storm-throwing sky kings, but sea-born beauties, patient fire-keepers, and tiny household spirits watching the door. After that, we move down from the mountain to the ground, where heroes wander through this ordered but unpredictable world. You'll walk beside Heracles on his exhausting labors, watch Perseus with his mirrored trick against Medusa, and follow Theseus into the quiet twist of the labyrinth. Later, the story will widen into the long, crowded road to the Trojan War, quarrels among gods, a stolen queen, ships gathering, and a city that will burn while poets take notes. Along the way, we'll pause now and then to look sideways into daily life, oracles murmuring at Delphi, modest offerings on smoky household altars, and the layered underworld where most souls drift in the asphodel meadows, while a lucky few reach Elysium. You'll drift through those scenes without needing to remember every name. And as we go, we'll keep one foot in your own world. When a myth brushes against a modern word, a movie, or some quiet idea about fate or justice, we'll simply point to it and move on. Not a complete catalogue of every version, but the entire story in broad, steady strokes, enough to feel that you have walked from the first empty moment to the soft twilight of the gods. So, let the myths unfold. You already know the bends in the river now. You don't have to steer. You can just follow the current and let the story carry you onward, from chaos to the first god who dares to open his eyes. At the very beginning we reach, after all that breathing and settling, there is almost nothing for you to hold on to. No sky, no sea, no sun or stars, just a wide, quiet openness, like a corridor with no walls yet, stretching out in all directions. The Greeks called this first state chaos, not the noisy kind with shouting and spilled wine and someone somewhere already regretting their life choices. No, this chaos is more like a soft, dim hallway of possibility, a gentle, dark in-between. Not a storm, but the pause before any weather has been invented.
You can imagine it as a calm, endless horizon with no line where sky meets land, because there is no sky and no land yet, only the space where they might someday be. In that stillness, things do not explode into being. They arrive slowly, the way sleep does when you stop trying so hard. From chaos, shapes of presence begin to settle. One of the first is Gaia, Earth herself. At first, she is not a woman in a robe or a statue in a temple. She is the feeling of something solid underfoot, the comfort of a floor appearing beneath you in the dark. Broad, steady, patient, a world body taking form, with hills like the first slow breaths and valleys like resting places for future rivers. Far below, as if the new floor of existence had its own basement, another presence opens, Tartarus. Again, not yet a prison with chains and fire, but a deep, distant below. You might think of it as the echo at the bottom of everything, a dark well under the dark hallway. Later, it will become the place where the worst offenders among gods and monsters are sent, understandably distressed about their accommodations. For now, it is simply depth itself, the idea that things can go down as well as out. Alongside them comes Eros, not the winged child from later paintings, not yet the mischievous matchmaker. Here, Eros is quieter and much larger. He is the gentle pull that makes separate things want to come together, the force that will someday draw gods toward each other and mortals toward trouble. Apparently, in Greek mythology, even the universe begins with a kind of attraction, a soft insistence that nothing should stay entirely alone. Night also arrives. Nyx. She is not just darkness, but the night itself, wrapping the new world in a cool, velvety shade. You can picture her as a slow curtain being drawn, turning the bright emptiness into something calmer, easier on the eyes. From her, in time, will come sleep, dreams, and a variety of shadows and secrets. But tonight, we're going to keep her simple, just the comfort of dimness after too much light. Around these first beings, others stir at the edges of the story. Erebus, the deep shadow that pools where Nyx passes. Perhaps a hint of Aether, a clearer, higher light that will one day be the bright air of the gods. They are less like characters speaking lines and more like moods, like the first colors washing over a blank canvas. For the moment, there are no thrones, no thunderbolts, no heroes trying to impress anyone, just earth settling under you, depth yawning far below, night folding softly overhead, and a quiet force of love and longing moving through it all. From this calm arrangement will come complicated families, sharp arguments, and very loud wars. In any case, that will take time. For now, let the myths unfold at this slower pace. Stay here in the first gentle movements of existence, where the world is still stretching, still deciding what it wants to be. Soon this quiet will be broken by the joining of earth and sky, and by children who find the darkness between their parents a little too cramped for comfort. So, the quiet does not last. Slowly, above Gaia's broad back, something new unfolds. She brings forth Uranus, the sky, not as empty blue, but as a vast star-flecked dome that bends down and presses close over her. Earth below, sky above, locked in a constant cosmic embrace. It sounds romantic. It is at first. The world is held between them like a secret, with no real gap, no wide open space, just the tight, warm darkness where new things can grow. From this closeness, children arrive, not a few, many. These are the Titans, the first recognizable family of gods, long before Zeus starts throwing lightning around. There is Oceanus, who will be all encircling waters, flowing quietly around the world. Hyperion, linked with the sun and the bright clear light of day. Thea, shining, and Themis, who will later stand for order and right conduct when such things become fashionable. Rhea, gentle and fertile, and Mnemosyne, memory herself. And of course, Cronus, sharp-minded and sharp-edged, who listens a little too carefully when anyone talks about power. They are joined by stranger siblings, the Cyclopes, one-eyed and brilliant, makers of thunderbolts and clever weapons, and the Hecontochires, the 100-handed ones, with 50 heads each, a design choice that is, apparently, in Greek mythology, perfectly acceptable. These are not minor children you can tuck quietly into a corner. They are forces, looming and loud, meant to help shape the world. For a while, there is a kind of golden calm. You can imagine Gaia content, Uranus stretched overhead, the Titans wandering in the narrow space between earth and sky, learning who they are. No cities, no temples, no heroes yet, just the first family of gods trying to exist in a universe that is suddenly crowded. But beneath that calm, something uneasy stirs. Uranus looks at his children and does not see help. He sees potential rivals. He is not ready for this scale of fatherhood, not the patient storytelling kind, but the kind where your offspring are vast, immortal beings who might decide they prefer a different arrangement of sky and earth. In any case, fear begins to harden in him. Slowly his embrace tightens. He presses his children down, forcing them into Gaia, hiding them away in the deep places of the earth. The world that felt like a cradle becomes a cramped, dark hallway with no doors. Gaia is understandably distressed. This is not what she had in mind when she brought forth the sky. Inside her, the Titans and their monstrous siblings strain and struggle, packed into a living prison. You'll drift, if you like, on that image for a moment. A universe that already contains gods, monsters, and memory itself, all squeezed into the dark because one parent cannot bear how powerful his family has become. Uranus's cruelty is cosmic, but his motives are very human. He fears being replaced. He dislikes change. He wants the world to stay exactly as it is, with him on top, literally and figuratively. This pattern, parents and children locked in a quiet contest over who will rule, will repeat again and again in these myths, not unusual in divine circles. Tonight, we're going to see how that first family argument leads directly to rebellion, a homemade weapon, and the next great turning of time.
At the very beginning we reach, after all that breathing and settling, there is almost nothing for you to hold on to. No sky, no sea, no sun or stars. Just a wide, quiet openness, like a corridor with no walls yet, stretching out in every direction. The Greeks called this first state chaos, not the noisy kind with shouting and spilled wine and someone somewhere already regretting their life choices. No, this chaos is more like a soft, dim hallway of possibility, a gentle, dark in-between. Not a storm, but the pause before any weather has been invented.
You can imagine it as a calm, endless horizon with no line where sky meets land, because there is no sky and no land yet, only the space where they might someday be. In that stillness, things do not explode into being. They arrive slowly, the way sleep does when you stop trying so hard. From chaos, shapes of presence begin to settle. One of the first is Gaia, Earth herself. At first she is not a woman in a robe or a statue in a temple. She is the feeling of something solid underfoot, the comfort of a floor appearing beneath you in the dark. Broad, steady, patient, a world body taking form, with hills like the first slow breaths and valleys like resting places for future rivers. Far below, as if the new floor of existence had its own basement, another presence opens, Tartarus. Again, not yet a prison with chains and fire, but a deep, distant below. You might think of it as the echo at the bottom of everything, a dark well under the dark hallway. Later, it will become the place where the worst offenders among gods and monsters are sent, understandably distressed about their accommodations. For now, it is simply depth itself, the idea that things can go down as well as out. Alongside them comes Eros, not the winged child from later paintings, not yet the mischievous matchmaker. Here, Eros is quieter and much larger. He is the gentle pull that makes separate things want to come together, the force that will someday draw gods towards each other and mortals towards trouble. Apparently, in Greek mythology, even the universe begins with a kind of attraction, a soft insistence that nothing should stay entirely alone. Night also arrives, Nyx. She is not just darkness, but the night itself, wrapping the new world in a cool, velvety shade. You can picture her as a slow curtain being drawn, turning the bright emptiness into something calmer, easier on the eyes. From her, in time, will come sleep, dreams, and a variety of shadows and secrets. But tonight we're going to keep her simple, just the comfort of dimness after too much light. Around these first beings, others stir at the edges of the story. Erebus, the deep shadow that pools where Nyx passes, perhaps a hint of Aether, a clearer, higher light that will one day be the bright air of the gods. They are less like characters speaking lines and more like moods, like the first colors washing over a blank canvas. For the moment, there are no thrones, no thunderbolts, no heroes trying to impress anyone. Just earth settling under you, depth yawning far below, night folding softly overhead, and a quiet force of love and longing moving through it all. From this calm arrangement will come complicated families, sharp arguments, and very loud wars. In any case, that will take time. For now, let the myths unfold at this slower pace. Stay here in the first gentle movements of existence, where the world is still stretching, still deciding what it wants to be. Soon, this quiet will be broken by the joining of earth and sky, and by children who find the darkness between their parents a little too cramped for comfort.
So the quiet does not last. Slowly, above Gaia's broad back, something new unfolds. She brings forth Uranus, the sky, not as empty blue, but as a vast star-flecked dome that bends down and presses close over her. Earth below, sky above, locked in a constant cosmic embrace.
It sounds romantic. It is, at first. The world is held between them like a secret, with no real gap, no wide open space, just the tight, warm darkness where new things can grow. From this closeness, children arrive. Not a few, many. These are the Titans, the first recognizable family of gods, long before Zeus starts throwing lightning around. There is Oceanus, who will be all encircling waters, flowing quietly around the world. Hyperion, linked with the sun and the bright, clear light of day. Theia, shining, and Themis, who will later stand for order and right conduct when such things become fashionable. Rhea, gentle and fertile, and Mnemosyne, memory herself. And of course, Cronus, sharp-minded and sharp-edged, who listens a little too carefully when anyone talks about power. They are joined by stranger siblings, the Cyclopes, one-eyed and brilliant, makers of thunderbolts and clever weapons, and the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, with 50 heads each, a design choice that is, apparently, in Greek mythology, perfectly acceptable. These are not minor children you can tuck quietly into a corner. They are forces, looming and loud, meant to help shape the world. For a while, there is a kind of golden calm. You can imagine Gaia content, Uranus stretched overhead, the Titans wandering in the narrow space between earth and sky, learning who they are. No cities, no temples, no heroes yet, just the first family of gods trying to exist in a universe that is suddenly crowded. But beneath that calm, something uneasy stirs. Uranus looks at his children and does not see help, he sees potential rivals. He is not ready for this scale of fatherhood, not the patient, storytelling kind, but the kind where your offspring are vast, immortal beings who might decide they prefer a different arrangement of sky and earth. In any case, fear begins to harden in him. Slowly, his embrace tightens. He presses his children down, forcing them into Gaia, hiding them away in the deep places of the earth. The world that felt like a cradle becomes a cramped, dark hallway with no doors. Gaia is understandably distressed. This is not what she had in mind when she brought forth the sky. Inside her, the Titans and their monstrous siblings strain and struggle, packed into a living prison. You'll drift, if you like, on that image for a moment, a universe that already contains gods, monsters, and memory itself, all squeezed into the dark because one parent cannot bear how powerful his family has become. Uranus's cruelty is cosmic, but his motives are very human. He fears being replaced. He dislikes change. He wants the world to stay exactly as it is, with him on top, literally and figuratively. This pattern, parents and children locked in a quiet contest over who will rule, will repeat again and again in these myths. Not unusual in divine circles. Tonight, we're going to see how that first family argument leads directly to rebellion, a homemade weapon, and the next great turning of time.
So the world is stuck, sky glued to earth, children wedged in the dark, and a father who refuses to make room. At some point, even a patient Earth Mother reaches her limit. Gaia, understandably distressed, feels every cramped Titan and every groan from inside her own body. The quiet between sky and soil is not peace, it is pressure.
She decides very calmly that this arrangement will not do. Not a shouting revolution with banners and speeches, but something simpler, sharper. In the deep of the earth, where metals sleep in stone, she shapes a new thing, a sickle of hard grey flint, curved like a crescent moon, edges honed on her own resolve. Then she calls her children close as they can come, and whispers a plan in the dark. Someone must stand up to Uranus, or more accurately, lie in wait under him. The Titans listen. They are powerful and strange, but also frightened, pressed so long they hardly remember what open space feels like. Most of them look away. Rebellion against the sky sounds risky. In any case, it is the youngest, Cronus, who steps forward. Cronus is not a pure-hearted hero. He is clever, ambitious, and more than a little resentful about spending his youth as geological compression. You can imagine him thinking that if someone is going to rule this world, it might as well be the Titan who finally gets to stretch his legs. Gaia gives him the sickle, and with it a role. Free your brothers and sisters, and the world will change. The ambush itself is almost quiet. No trumpets, no dramatic speeches. Uranus, as usual, bends low to lie across Gaia, claiming her and the space she ought to have. This time, Cronus is waiting. Hidden in the shadows of his mother's body, he reaches up with the stone blade, a sudden, decisive motion. The bond between sky and earth is cut. Uranus is forced back and up, separated from Gaia, and for the first time there is distance, air, room for mountains to rise and seas to gather. Greek poets do not spare the details, but you, if you like, can let the myths unfold in softer focus. From the blood that falls to earth, new beings spring up. The Furies, those relentless goddesses of vengeance, towering giants, other strange presences that will haunt the edges of later stories. From what is thrown into the sea, foam gathers, drifts, and will one day shape itself into Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, stepping out of the waves as if brutality were just another kind of beginning. Apparently, in Greek mythology, even a family injury can double as urban planning and creative arts funding. More space, more beings, more drama. Cronus takes his place as ruler, the Titans are free, and the sky now hangs at a respectful distance above the earth. For a moment, it looks like progress. But a pattern has started. A parent who fears change, a child with a sharp tool, a prophecy humming in the background. Tonight, we're going from this first overthrow straight toward another uneasy reign, another fear of replacement, and a new baby who does not intend to stay swallowed forever.
So for a moment, it looks like progress, and the cosmos takes a long, relieved breath. Cronus has done what no child has managed before. He has separated sky from earth, ended Uranus's suffocating embrace, and opened up a space where things can actually move. You can almost feel the world stretch its shoulders. This is the age that later poets will call a kind of golden time, the age of Cronus. Not golden palaces and endless feasts, but something quieter. People, in some versions, live simply, almost lazily, under a sky that finally keeps its distance. The earth offers food easily. Grain and fruit appear with very little coaxing, and the struggle that will define later ages has not fully settled in yet. Work exists, but it is gentle, more like tending than battling. No one is yet marching in armor. No one is yet praying to Olympian gods, because those gods are still, quite literally, not born.
You, listening from a much later century, are standing with them on a soft plateau in the story, a calm ledge between storms, where the world is young but already carrying old scars. At the center of this gentler age stands Cronus, and beside him Rhea. She is his sister and his queen, another child of Gaia and Uranus, and together they form a kind of stabilizing pair. Not passionate lovers in the way later myths will describe Zeus and his many entanglements, but partners in rule, keeping the Titans more or less in line, smoothing quarrels, deciding who governs which part of the growing cosmos. Apparently, in Greek mythology, family meetings involve tectonic beings assigning mountains and seas. Rhea's presence matters. Where Cronus is sharp and wary, she is patient, rhythmic like the cycles of the moon and the tides that later poets associate with her. You can imagine her as the one who encourages this new, milder way of living, where humans are not yet crushed by labor and fear, and where the seasons turn without too much drama. But there is another sound under this quiet, the echo of a curse. When Uranus fell, when his blood struck the earth and new strange beings rose from it, he did not go silently. He warned, or perhaps spat out, a prophecy that Cronus too would be overthrown by one of his own children. The words lodge in Cronus's mind like a shard of flint. At first he can ignore it. The world is peaceful, his rule is unchallenged, and Rhea walks beside him. Time passes, slowly, and the prophecy sits at the back of his thoughts like a half-remembered dream. But each time Rhea becomes pregnant, that quiet dream stirs. Each time she rests a hand on her stomach, Cronus hears his father's voice again. Fear, once invited in, does not stay small. It begins as a reasonable caution. He has, after all, personally overthrown a parent. Then it curdles. He starts to watch Rhea more closely, to count possible rivals before they are even born, to imagine tiny hands someday reaching for his sickle. In any case, sleep becomes harder for him, even in this so-called golden age. And here the pattern sharpens. Cronus, determined not to become Uranus, finds himself repeating the same shape of dread. Uranus tried to stuff his children back into the earth to prevent change. Cronus will find his own method soon enough. The details will differ, but the fear is identical. A refusal to let the future arrive on its own feet. If you let the myths unfold in your mind, you can see the irony glowing softly. This age could have lasted, in theory, a peaceful world, a steady queen, a ruler who had seen his father's mistakes. But the prophecy hums, and the seed of the next disaster has already taken root. The next turn of the cycle is coming, carried quietly in Rhea's womb, and one particular baby is not going to accept life in the dark.
So the peaceful golden age hums along, and somewhere inside Rhea, the next disaster is quietly kicking. You already know the pattern by now: prophecy, anxiety, and a God who takes things far too literally. When her first baby comes, a daughter named Hestia, Rhea expects a celebration, a cradle perhaps, or at least a polite blessing. Instead, Cronus leans in, takes one look, and, in a move that is apparently in Greek mythology considered a solution, he swallows her whole. No thunder, no ceremony, just one gulp and an awkward silence.
Rhea is understandably distressed, but before she can really process what has happened, time moves on. Another baby, Demeter, another nervous father, another quick swallow. The rhythm settles in with a strange ritual calm. Birth, brief joy, sudden shadow. Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. Down they go one by one, tucked not into beds, but into the dark pantry of their father's stomach. The myths do not linger on the mechanics, not the chewing kind of eating, but a surreal, almost symbolic act, as if Cronus is trying to digest the future itself. It becomes his anxious little habit, his culinary paranoia, each child treated like a dangerous idea to be swallowed before it can take shape. In any case, you can imagine the atmosphere at home, not ideal. Rhea's grief grows slowly, like a storm you hear long before it breaks. She walks the bright halls of this early world with empty arms, a queen surrounded by absence. The cradle stays quiet. The names of her children are spoken, but the children themselves are nowhere to be seen. At last her sorrow hardens into a careful, quiet anger, and she goes looking for help. She turns to Gaia, the patient earth, who has seen all of this before, and to Uranus, the distant sky, who once suffered at Cronus's hands. Together they whisper a plan, simple enough to sound like a bedtime trick, serious enough to bend the course of the cosmos. The next baby, they decide, will not go down so easily. When Zeus is born, Rhea does what every mother in a myth eventually does. She lies to a powerful man for a very good reason. She wraps a stone in soft cloth, cradles it like a newborn, and presents it to Cronus with practiced weariness. He barely looks. Habit takes over. Gulp. The prophecy, he thinks, is safely contained. The real baby, meanwhile, is already on his way to Crete. There, in a cave tucked into the island's rugged hills, the hidden heir grows up in secret, not in a palace, but in a rocky nursery, with dripping water, cool shadows, and the low, steady breathing of the earth. A divine goat, Amalthea, nurses him. Nymphs rock him. Friendly guardians bang their shields and shout whenever he cries, so his small guard voice is lost in the noise. Tonight, we're going into a world where a baby's nap can decide the shape of the sky. As you let the myths unfold, you'll drift with Zeus in that cave for a moment, before he grows up, asks uncomfortable questions about his missing siblings, and decides that this family dinner situation needs to change.
So, Zeus grows in that cave, and you grow with him a little. Not in size, obviously, but in understanding. The baby, whose cries once needed a full percussion section, becomes a quiet, watchful youth, listening more than he speaks, testing his strength against rocks and storms, and slowly collecting stories about the strange, half-empty family he's never met. He hears, in fragments, about the swallowed children, not a metaphor, actual swallowing. He hears about the world outside, ruled by Cronus, where time itself feels tense and unfinished, as if the sky is holding its breath. Apparently, in Greek mythology, this counts as normal parenting. Zeus does not agree. The more he learns, the more that cave feels less like a hiding place and more like a waiting room. Tonight, we're going from that waiting room to the first real decision Zeus ever makes. He doesn't rush out swinging a lightning bolt. He doesn't have one yet.
Instead, he chooses something quieter, strategy. With the help of Metis, a goddess of cunning thought, he prepares a special drink for Cronus. Not a loving cup of tea, but not open warfare either. Something in between. Metis teaches him patience. She shows him how power can sit inside a simple cup, how a change in the body can become a change in the world. Zeus goes to Cronus in disguise, offers the potion as a harmless refreshment, and the old Titan, tired and suspicious but still vain, accepts. In any case, what's one more drink when you've already eaten 5 children? The effect is immediate, and, from Cronus's perspective, understandably distressed. The swallowed gods come back up, one after another, not as infants, but as fully grown deities, blinking in the light they haven't seen since birth. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, out they spill, in reverse order, like a very unsettling roll call. It's an odd reunion, not the teary, slow-motion kind, more a stunned, breathless moment where everyone checks that they are in fact outside their father now. They remember darkness, pressure, the muffled beat of a Titan's heart. They see Zeus, younger in years, but free, standing there with the empty cup. And in that instant, the family tree quietly rearranges itself, with Zeus at the center, not because he is oldest, but because he is the one who acted. They talk. They share that strange, cramped childhood, that sense of having been present but unseen. The shared trauma becomes a kind of glue. Hera's pride, Hades' reserve, Poseidon's restless force, Demeter's deep, steady care, Hestia's gentle warmth, all of it now points in one direction, away from Cronus. But 5 siblings and 1 clever youngest god are not enough against the older Titans. So Zeus looks deeper, literally, down into the places even Titans fear. There, in Tartarus, he finds the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants, hurled away long ago by Uranus and then neglected by Cronus. Forgotten workers of creation, buried possibilities. Zeus frees them. Chains fall. The Cyclopes, grateful and slightly terrifying, repay him in the only currency they know, tools. They forge thunder and lightning for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon that can stir the sea, a helm of invisibility for Hades that can erase a god from sight. Not the noisy kind of power yet, but the promise of it, humming in the air. The world feels different after that. The sky is still in place, the earth still steady, but somewhere between them a new tension forms. Old Titans on one side, young Olympians and their strange allies on the other, like 2 storm fronts inching toward each other. You can almost hear the first distant rumble. Let the myths unfold a little further, and you'll drift with us into that gathering pressure as the first blows of the Titanomachy fall and the shape of the cosmos hangs for a long echoing moment in the balance.
The rumble becomes a season, then a year, then 10 years. Not a single blazing clash you could point to on a calendar, but a long, slow war that hangs over the world like weather. This is the Titanomachy, and tonight we're going to stay a little outside it, as if you're watching a storm from a covered porch. You don't see individual spears or clever battlefield maneuvers. You see patterns. You feel pressure.
Time stretches, and the war between generations turns into a kind of background thunder for the young cosmos. On one side, the old order, Cronus and many of the Titans hold their ground on Mount Othrys, the mountain of the previous regime, solid and heavy, like a piece of the first world that refuses to move. On the other side, the new order, slowly gathering itself on Mount Olympus, with Zeus and his freed siblings, a smaller, sharper group, looking up at a sky that might finally belong to them. It is not a war of clever heroes and shining armor, not yet. It is a war of forces. Apparently, in Greek mythology, when gods fight, the weather report suffers. Thunder rolls for years. The earth shakes so often that earthquakes become almost routine, like a nervous habit of the planet. Mountains shudder, valleys echo. You hear of lightning, but not of who precisely is standing where. The details blur, the scale stays. Zeus does have help. The Cyclopes, those one-eyed craftsmen he freed from their long imprisonment, forge him thunderbolts, bright, decisive streaks in an otherwise hazy conflict. The 100-handed ones, the Hecaton Caceres, stand at the edges like living siege engines, each with 50 heads and 100 arms, calmly picking up boulders the size of hills and throwing them again and again, not fast, just relentlessly. If you try to imagine this as a neat series of battles, your mind gets tired. Better to think of it as 10 years of strain in the fabric of the world. Neither side gives way quickly. Cronus is powerful, and the Titans are ancient, rooted in the first ordering of things. But the Olympians have something new, allies from below, from Tartarus, and a sense that time is, quietly, on their side. At some point, no one bothers to give an exact date. The balance tilts. Zeus's thunder grows louder than the old sky's silence. The 100-handed ones close in. The Titans break. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but like a cliff slowly collapsing into the sea. Victory, in any case, does not mean mercy. Many of the defeated Titans are driven down into Tartarus, that deep, echoing pit beneath even the underworld, and there the 100-handed giants become wardens instead of artillery. They stand watch so the old order cannot climb back up. And a few Titans who helped Zeus are spared, folded carefully into the new arrangement. The cosmos doesn't reset, it reorganizes. And now, a quiet. After 10 years of rumbling, the storm clears. Zeus and his siblings settle on Mount Olympus, not just as a family, but as an administration. They divide the world like rooms in a shared house. The sky to Zeus, bright and changeable. The sea to Poseidon, deep and restless. The underworld to Hades, still and secretive. The earth in between remains a kind of common ground where gods, monsters, and future heroes will all wander. Let the myths unfold a little more, and you'll drift with us from this new clean horizon into the everyday business of Olympus, quarrels, promises, punishments, and the strange ways these distant decisions fall, softly but firmly, into human lives.
So now the world is divided. The Titans are put away, and the dust of war has settled into something like routine. Tonight we're going to step into that new routine, into the quiet after the thunder, and meet the gods not as distant forces, but as the slightly chaotic household that runs this freshly organized cosmos. At the top of it all sits Zeus, not the creator of everything, but the one who arrived late and took charge. He rules the sky, the high, clean air, the rolling clouds, the sudden bolt of lightning that says very clearly, "Remember who's in charge." He is the god of law and order, of oaths and assemblies, the one who tries to keep gods and mortals more or less in line. Not perfectly, not calmly, but he is the one everyone looks to when storms, political or otherwise, begin to gather. Beside him, on her own throne, is Hera, queen of the gods. She is the guardian of marriage, of the solemn promise between families, of the respect due to a household. In statues, she is dignified, crowned, often seated like a queen who expects people to behave. And then there is her marriage to Zeus, which apparently in Greek mythology is complicated. His wandering eye, her sharp sense of justice, their many arguments, these are not treated as gossip so much as explanations for why jealousy, loyalty, and wounded pride feel so powerful in the human world. Below the bright sky, the three brothers' agreement still shapes everything. Zeus has the heavens. Poseidon, restless and bearded, holds the sea, the rivers, and the earthquakes that make the ground itself shiver. Sailors whisper to him before they launch. Farmers curse him when the earth splits. Hades, meanwhile, rules the underworld with a quiet, steady hand, not a cackling villain, but a stern caretaker of shades, making sure that once life has ended, it stays where it should. The living world stretches between them like shared property, constantly visited, occasionally shaken, never entirely safe. Around this central trio gathers a full divine neighborhood. Athena, born from Zeus's head in a rather dramatic medical emergency, stands for wisdom, strategy, and cities, carrying her spear and her calm, assessing gaze. Apollo brings light, music, and prophecy, his lyre and his oracle at Delphi shaping how people hear the future. Artemis, his twin, keeps to the wild places, the moonlit forests, guardian of the hunt and of those who would rather stay untouched. There is Ares, the raw chaos of war, more blood and shouting than strategy, and Aphrodite, the soft but unstoppable force of love and desire that can topple kings faster than any army. Hermes moves quickly between worlds, god of travel, trade, and clever words, a patron of messengers and occasionally thieves. Hephaestus tends the forges, limping but ingenious, crafting thunderbolts, jewelry, and palaces in bronze and gold. Dionysus arrives last to Olympus, bringing wine, ecstasy, and the strange relief of letting go when order bends but does not quite break. Olympus itself is not a solemn courtroom in the clouds. It is more like a large, extended family home with an impressive view, shared meals, arguments over who insulted whom, alliances formed over cups of nectar. The gods feast, they talk, they plot, and in any case their decisions drift down as weather, as luck, as sudden inspiration or misfortune in human lives. If you listen closely, you'll drift from this divine dining room to the mortal world below, where these personalities begin to step into stories. Births of heroes, promises broken, cities founded under the watchful and sometimes distracted eyes of their patron gods. Let the myths unfold a little further, and we'll watch how this family in the clouds becomes the background noise of every ordinary human day.
From that divine dining room, with its endless nectar and slightly tense family politics, the view slowly widens again. The Titans are locked away, the Olympian seating chart is finally sorted, and you might think the world can relax now. Not quite. Because apparently, in Greek mythology, when you tidy one corner of the cosmos, something much worse crawls out of another. In this case, that something is Typhon. Not a simple dragon, not a single neat monster, but a kind of living nightmare, a man-shaped torso rising from the waist up, legs coiling into serpent tails, and from his shoulders a forest of snake heads hissing in different voices. Eyes blazing, hands reaching the sky, his whole body wrapped in storm and smoke. More like a fever dream than a creature. The story goes that Typhon rises as the last desperate challenge to Zeus's new order, a final exam the universe sets for its latest ruler. The gods have just survived the Titanomachy, that long grinding war of stone and thunder. They are, you might say, understandably distressed to see this new arrival. And Zeus, who has been throwing lightning bolts with great confidence, suddenly finds himself facing something that throws them back. Some versions are very flattering to Zeus. In those, he stands firm. There is a quick but impressive battle, and Typhon is blasted down without much fuss. Other traditions are more honest, or at least more dramatic. In those, Typhon actually overpowers Zeus, cuts out the sinews from his hands and feet, and hides them away in a cave. The king of the gods is left helpless, stashed like luggage, while the cosmos holds its breath. At one point, the story even has Zeus fleeing to Egypt, the gods disguising themselves as animals to hide. Panic, it seems, is not unusual in divine circles. Eventually, with help from Hermes or other allies, Zeus recovers his strength, finds his stolen sinews, and returns to the fight. This time he wins. Typhon is struck down, buried deep beneath the earth, sometimes said to be pinned under Mount Etna in Sicily. When the mountain smokes, when the ground rumbles, that is Typhon turning in his sleep, the last echo of that monstrous resistance against the sky. With the Titans in Tartarus and Typhon under stone, the universe finally quiets. No more world-shaping wars, no more cosmic coups, just a steady pattern of seasons, storms, and small divine quarrels. Tonight, we're going from the roaring edge of creation towards something closer to everyday life. The gods still throw tantrums, but now the stage is smaller. A city, a household, a single unlucky traveler on a lonely road. This is the calm after the cosmic storms, the part of the story where space opens for humans. First, rough early people shaped from earth, then the more familiar figures, craftsmen, shepherds, sailors, and the heroes who will wander through this newly organized world. Let the myths unfold a little further, and you'll drift down from Olympus to the ground itself, where a strange pair of brothers begins to argue about clay, fire, and what humans should be allowed to know.
Down on the ground, while Prometheus is still eyeing his clay and his stolen fire, another quieter story about humans is taking shape. It doesn't involve lightning bolts or jars full of troubles, not at first. It's a story the poet Hesiod tells about how people themselves slowly change over time, moving through different ages like the rings in a tree. Apparently, in Greek mythology, humanity does not start with one perfect model and then continue in a straight line, not the neat timeline you might see in a school book, but a series of moods, almost like different dreams the world has about itself. Hesiod speaks of 5 ages: golden, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron.
each one a little less easy, a little more complicated, as if the gods keep adjusting the recipe and never quite liking the result. The Golden Age comes first under Cronus, before Zeus is in charge. People live like children in a safe garden. No one has to plough or plant. The earth simply offers food quietly and without complaint. There is no war, no old age stooping their backs, no anxious counting of coins. They do not even fear death. They simply drift away, gently, as if falling asleep in the sun. It is Cronus's world, slow and soft, the shadow of his rule lying over the fields instead of iron laws. Then the mood changes. The Silver Age arrives, and the people are taller, louder, somehow less teachable. They live long as children, but when they finally grow up, they ignore the gods. In any case, Zeus is not impressed. He ends them. After that comes the Bronze Age, hard and shining. These people love war the way earlier people loved peace. They build with bronze, fight with bronze, and, rather inconveniently, die by bronze. You can feel the slow decline. With each age, humans become more violent, more suspicious, more aware that the world does not automatically care for them. Life grows shorter, work grows heavier. The gods feel farther away, more like distant rulers than nearby neighbors. It is not the noisy kind of disaster, but a steady tightening in the chest, the sense that you now have to earn what once was given. And then, in the middle of this downward slide, Hesiod does something unexpected. He inserts an extra chapter, the Heroic Age. A brief, bright interruption. Here walk the figures you already know or are about to meet. Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, the warriors of Thebes and Troy. They are still mortal, still fated to suffer, but they stand out like bright constellations in a darkening sky, half belonging to the gods, half stuck with the rest of us. Finally comes the Iron Age, Hesiod's own time. Our time, he suggests, is full of toil, envy, and worry. People cheat, neighbors quarrel, children do not honor parents, and justice feels fragile. Tonight we're going not through literal archaeology, but through feelings. These ages are less a calendar and more a mood chart for the Greek soul, nostalgic for a simpler past, suspicious of the present, unsure about the future. If that sounds familiar, it is because not much has changed. People still imagine golden yesterdays and iron-tinted news reports. Let the myths unfold a little more, and you'll drift from these grand, hazy ages down into the very specific life of one craftsman god and his stubborn brother, who are about to argue over exactly how difficult being human should be.
Prometheus is the stubborn brother in question, the one who keeps arguing that being human should come with at least a few basic features: warmth, food, a chance. His name means forethinker, and tonight we're going to sit with him for a while, because he is one of the few beings in this whole mythic world who is almost always thinking about you. He is a Titan who fought on Zeus's side in the Great War, which already tells you something. Not a pure rebel, not a simple loyalist, but someone who makes careful, slightly inconvenient choices. After the victory, when the new order settles over the world like cooling lava, Prometheus keeps his attention on the small, shivering shapes of humans below, made of earth and breath, trying to live under a sky ruled by thunder. The first argument comes over dinner, or rather over sacrifice. The gods expect the best cuts, naturally. Prometheus, asked to arrange the portions, quietly stages a demonstration. He makes 2 piles from a slaughtered animal. One is a mound of juicy meat hidden under a thin, unappealing layer of stomach. The other is a gleaming heap of white bones wrapped in rich, glistening fat. It looks impressive. It is, nutritionally, a disappointment. Zeus chooses the pretty bones. Apparently, in Greek mythology, even the king of the gods can be fooled by good presentation. When he realizes he has been tricked into leaving the real food for humans, he is, as you might expect, understandably distressed. From that moment, the rule is set. The fragrant smoke of fat and bone rises to Olympus, and people keep the meat. Zeus responds by taking fire away from the world. No more warm hearths, no more cooked food, just cold nights and raw offerings. Not punishment on a cosmic scale, perhaps, but very effective if you are trying to make humans feel small. Prometheus refuses to accept this chilly downgrade. He goes up to the god's own fire, steals a spark, and tucks it into a hollow fennel stalk, the ancient equivalent of a very discreet thermos. Then he carries it down to earth and opens his hand. A small, flickering rebellion. Not a storm or an earthquake, just a glow that lets people cook, harden bricks, shape metal, push back the dark. Zeus cannot let this stand. In any case, letting one titan quietly outmaneuver you twice would set a dangerous precedent. So Prometheus is chained to a rock at the edge of the world, high and exposed. An eagle comes each day, tears at his liver, and leaves. The liver grows back overnight. The eagle returns. The cycle continues, again and again, until his body is less a person and more a living monument to the cost of helping humans. The story softens if you listen to it slowly. Not endless screaming, but an image, sky, stone, wings, and a figure who chose to suffer so that people could hold a little light in their hands. Fire is warmth, safety, cooked bread. It is also weapons, burned forests, toppled cities. Not the simple gift of a friendly god, but a double-edged tool that lets humans change the world and sometimes ruin it. For the Greeks, this was a way to think about progress itself. Every new power comes with a bill attached. Knowledge, technology, even hope, all of them arrive with risk. Prometheus's rock reminds you that comfort has a history and that someone, somewhere in the story, always pays. Soon, Zeus will decide that if humans insist on keeping their fire, he will give them something else as well, a beautiful, curious woman with a sealed jar and a very unfortunate sense of timing.
So, after Prometheus's fire and Zeus's very public outrage, the king of the gods decides that punishment should be more elegant, less thunderbolt, more long-term consequences. If humans insist on keeping their bright, stolen flame, then apparently, in Greek mythology, they will also receive something beautiful that carries its own quiet disaster. Tonight, we're going to watch that disaster being assembled. Zeus calls the gods together and orders a new creation, the first mortal woman. Not born in the usual way, but crafted. Hephaestus, the smith, shapes her from clay, the same humble material Prometheus used for humans, but this time the workmanship is finer, almost too perfect. Athena dresses her and gives her a graceful mind and skilled hands. Aphrodite adds beauty and charm, the kind that turns heads and softens decisions. Hermes contributes a quick tongue and a certain talent for mischief. Each god adds a gift, until she is a bundle of contradictions, delightful and dangerous, innocent and unsettling. They name her Pandora, all-gifted, which sounds generous, almost festive. In any case, the gifts come with small print that no one reads. Along with Pandora, Zeus arranges for a wedding. She will go down to earth as a bride for Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose name means afterthought, which tells you almost everything you need to know about his decision-making. Prometheus had warned him very clearly not to accept any present from Zeus, but when a radiant, divinely accessorized woman arrives at your door, it is, as they say, not unusual in divine circles to forget earlier memos. With Pandora comes a jar. Not a dainty little trinket box, but a large storage vessel, the sort Greeks actually used, heavy and practical. Later storytellers will shrink it into a neat box, but the older image is more domestic, more ordinary, something you might keep by the wall in a quiet corner. She is told not to open it. That's all. A simple instruction, sealed with divine authority. Of course, once you tell someone not to look, you have already planted the seed. The jar sits there day after day, solid and silent. Pandora goes about her new life, but her mind keeps circling back. What could be inside? Treasure, perhaps, or secrets from Olympus, or nothing in its own way. Eventually, she lifts the lid. Not slowly, not ceremonially, just a small, decisive movement, the sort you might make when you finally give in and peek. From the dark interior, things begin to escape. Not monsters with claws, but lighter, stranger shapes, sickness that clings to the body, toil that bends the back, sorrow that sits on the chest at night. They rush out like startled insects, like smoky birds, spreading across the world, settling into houses, fields, and hearts. Human life, which had been easier, if not exactly perfect, is suddenly full of effort and ache. Pandora is understandably distressed. She slams the lid down, hands shaking, but it is far too late for most of what was stored inside. Only one thing remains trapped at the bottom of the jar, a small, stubborn presence the Greeks called elpis. We usually translate elpis as hope. Some say it stays inside to be kept safe for you, a last comfort when everything else goes wrong. Others suggest a quieter, more unsettling idea, that hope itself might be yet another illusion, held back, measured out carefully so you never quite give up, even when reason suggests you should. Either way, the world is now mixed. Beauty and hardship, love and loss, warm fire and the risk that comes with it. You live in that mixture every day, the same way the Greeks did. You get sickness, toil, and sorrow, but you also get this lingering sense that tomorrow might be better, or at least survivable. And as the troubles spread and hope waits in its jar, the gods are not finished explaining why human lives twist the way they do. Somewhere, 3 quiet figures are already waiting with their threads.
Those 3 quiet figures with their threads might feel very far away from you, sitting or lying wherever you are now. But for the Greeks, fate wasn't only written in distant cosmic offices, it brushed past the doorway, the hearth, the little corner of the house where a tiny shrine watched you eat your dinner. Not a grand temple with marble columns, but a shelf, a niche, a small stone by the door. There, people left drops of wine, crumbs of bread, a sprig of greenery. The household fire had its spirit, the threshold had its guardian, the crossroads outside had their own small, easily offended powers. Apparently, in Greek mythology, even your front step was under supervision. You can imagine the rhythm. Morning fire rekindled, a murmured word to Hestia at the hearth. A traveller leaving home, touching the doorway, asking the quiet spirits of the house to keep things safe until they returned. Not loud, not dramatic, just repeated, the way you might check a lock or switch off a light. Small actions, tying a human life to the gods with invisible string. And when the small strings weren't enough, there were the bigger questions. Should we go to war? Should we marry this person? Will the crops survive this year? For that, you might walk, or sail, or slowly climb all the way to a place like Delphi, where Apollo was said to speak through his oracle. You waited your turn, brought your offering, and asked your question. The answer did not arrive as a clear checklist. It came as a riddle, a phrase that could mean two things at once, or three if the priestess was having a particularly inspired day. Not the simple yes or no you might hope for, but a kind of divine puzzle. In any case, the responsibility to interpret it correctly was yours, which is one way to share the blame when things go wrong. Between these questions and answers, people bound themselves with oaths. To swear by Zeus or by Apollo was not casual decoration, it was like inviting a thunderbolt to audit your honesty. Hospitality, too, was wrapped in this sacred seriousness. Zeus Xenios, Zeus as protector of guests, watched how you treated the stranger at your door. Feed them, wash their feet, give them a place to sleep, because the exhausted traveler might be a god in disguise, and surprise inspections were again not unusual in divine circles. Around all of this moved the festivals, processions with people walking in order, carrying branches or small statues, the sound of pipes and drums, the smell of incense and roasting meat. Not a rock concert, but a slow, patterned movement through the streets year after year, so the city could remember who its gods were and who they were. In these moments, the big stories slipped quietly into daily life. You knew the tale of Demeter searching for Persephone, so when the fields went brown, it wasn't just weather, it was a mother's grief. You knew Athena had won your city with an olive tree, so every twist of an olive branch in the wind could feel like a reminder to be clever, or at least not foolish. Tonight, we're going from thunderbolts and monster-slaying heroes into this softer world of habits and hopes, where myths hum in the background like a distant song. Let the myths unfold a little further, and you'll drift with them into the places where people stepped from their doorways, looked at the sky, and tried to guess which god was watching that day.
So from thunderbolts and watchful doorways, let's step into a quieter kind of power, the kind that moves slowly through fields and kitchens and the turning of the year. Tonight we're going into a story that looks gentle on the surface, but underneath is about loss, change, and the strange comfort of knowing that some goodbyes are not forever. Demeter was one of the older Olympian gods, sister of Zeus and goddess of grain. Not war, not storms, not monsters, just bread, harvest, and the steady promise that if you planted in the dark soil, something would grow. She had a daughter, Persephone, a bright springtime sort of girl who walked through meadows as if the world had been made simply so she could pick flowers from it. Apparently, in Greek mythology, this kind of happiness is a little suspicious.
Hades, lord of the underworld, saw Persephone and wanted her as his queen. In some tellings he asked Zeus, in others he simply acted, but in any case the ground opened quietly beneath her. Not with explosions or screaming armies, just a sudden cleft in the earth, a black chariot, and Persephone drawn gently but firmly down into the shadowed halls below. Demeter turned, and her daughter was gone. No note, no trail, just a trampled patch of wildflowers. Understandably distressed, she began to wander. Not in a dramatic sprint, but in that numb, repetitive way you might pace a hallway at night, checking the same empty rooms. She left Olympus, disguised herself as an old woman, and walked through the mortal world, asking questions, listening for rumors, refusing to believe that absence could be final. As she searched, she neglected her work. Fields that had always answered her with green shoots now waited in vain. Seeds lay in the ground and did not stir. Slowly, the world mirrored her grief. Stalks withered, orchards dropped their fruit and stood bare. The air itself seemed thinner, colder. People began to starve, and their prayers rose like smoke to the other gods, who noticed that a mother's sorrow was threatening the entire system. Zeus, never fond of losing worshippers, finally intervened. A deal had to be made. Hermes was sent down as a negotiator to Hades to ask for Persephone's return. Hades agreed, but with a quiet condition already in place. Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds in the underworld, tying her to that realm. Not a curse shouted in anger, just a small binding taste. So a compromise emerged, one of the most famous in myth. Persephone would rise to her mother for part of the year, and for part she would return below as queen beside Hades. When she comes back to Demeter, the world warms. Shoots push through the soil, lambs are born, and the air smells of rain on dry dust. Spring and summer are simply reunion written across the landscape. When she descends again, Demeter grieves, but now it's a grief with a calendar. Leaves fall, fields are cleared, the light thins into autumn and winter, and the earth rests, holding its breath until the next return. The seasons become a family story, not just temperature and daylight, but a mother learning to let go, a daughter dividing her life between old home and new. If you've ever watched someone grow up and move away, you can hear the echo. The myth says, yes, there will be absence, and yes, it will hurt, but the pattern is not only loss. There is leaving, and there is coming back. Let the myths unfold a little further, and you'll drift from these quiet fields into other thresholds between worlds, where the line between living and dead was thin enough to cross carefully.
From those quiet fields of departure, you'll drift a little further down to the place where the journey after death becomes a kind of routine, not comforting exactly, but organized. Tonight we're going to walk slowly through the Greek underworld the way an ordinary soul might. First, there is the river. Not a roaring waterfall or a dramatic canyon, not the noisy kind of terror at all, but a broad, dark band of water, the Styx. The soul arrives at its bank like a traveller at a ferry crossing, with no luggage, no companions, just the faint memory of sunlight. Waiting there is Charon, the ferryman, permanently underemployed, but never quite out of work. He does not give stirring speeches, he simply holds out a hand for the small coin the living were meant to place under your tongue or on your eyes.
If the coin is there, you step aboard. If not, you wait on the near shore for a very long time, which in any case is a good reminder to pay attention to burial customs. The boat glides across the Styx in silence, the world of the living sliding away behind you like a shoreline in fog. Apparently, in Greek mythology, even death comes with service fees. On the far side, the underworld opens up, not as a single cavern of torment, but as a whole landscape. You pass through gates, perhaps nod politely to Cerberus, the three-headed god-dog, who is more about preventing escapes than terrifying arrivals. Then comes judgment. 3 ancient kings sit as judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. They listen, they weigh, they sort, not with modern paperwork, but with an old, steady sense of what kind of life you lived. Most people, neither especially cruel nor especially heroic, go to the asphodel meadows, not a paradise, not a torture chamber, but a vast pale field where souls wander like shadows of themselves, moving through tall, ghostly plants, remembering and forgetting in equal measure. Ordinary lives continuing in a quiet key. A few are sent higher, to Elysium. This is the pleasant quarter, soft light, green fields, gentle breezes off an invisible sea. Heroes, poets, and those favored by the gods find a kind of eternal afternoon there, not feasting wildly, but existing in a calm, perfected version of the world they knew. And far below, carefully fenced off by distance and dread, lies Tartarus, not a flaming inferno, but a deep shadowy pit where the worst offenders against gods and order endure carefully tailored consequences. Sisyphus endlessly pushes his stone uphill, only for it to roll back each time, like a task you can never quite finish. Tantalus stands forever thirsty, with water at his chin and fruit above his head, both always just out of reach. The punishments repeat, not to shock you, but to show that some choices echo without end. For the Greeks, this map of Styx, fields, sunlight, and pit offered something precious, structure. Death remained mysterious, but not chaotic. There were ferries and judges, meadows and rewards, and a distant place for those who broke the deepest rules. In that order they found a kind of meaning, a sense that the story did not simply stop, it branched. And just when this underworld seems fixed and closed, the myths quietly open a side door where a living person steps down into the dark and tries against all odds to bring someone back.
So, from that side door in the underworld, where a living person tries to walk back against the current of death, we can follow another figure who moves between worlds, though mostly on foot and mostly alone. Tonight we're going to walk with Heracles, not as a roaring action hero, but as a tired man on long, dusty roads. Heracles is a son of Zeus, which sounds glamorous until you remember what that usually means. A mortal mother, divine interference, and Hera, understandably distressed, watching yet another reminder of her husband's wandering attention grow up on earth. Apparently, in Greek mythology, this rarely ends with a healthy family dinner. Hera sends madness. In that brief, terrible storm of the mind, Heracles kills his own children. When the darkness lifts, he remembers, not the noisy kind of guilt that shouts, but the heavy, quiet kind that just sits there.
To atone, he is given labors by King Eurystheus, a rather nervous relative who hides in a storage jar whenever Heracles comes back. In any case, the famous 12 labors begin not with a trumpet blast, but with a walk. No chariot, no escort, just Heracles, a club, a bow, and the sound of his sandals on the road. The first task, the Nemean lion, waits in a region of low hills and scrub. No cheering crowd, no rival heroes, only abandoned fields, a few ruined walls, and stories of a beast whose skin cannot be pierced. You can imagine the evening light sliding over rocks as he tracks paw prints into a narrowing ravine, the world going quiet except for his breathing and the occasional stone skittering away. When he finally strangles the lion and works out by trial and error how to use its own claws to skin it, it feels less like a victory parade and more like a cold, necessary chore. Then the Hydra in the marshes of Lerna. Not a dramatic arena, just reeds, stagnant water, and a low mist that clings to his legs. Each time he cuts off a head, more grow back, which is an excellent metaphor for certain kinds of problems, and also very inconvenient. With the help of a companion, he burns the necks closed, the air thick with smoke and the smell of the swamp. Another monster gone, another long walk home. Slowly a rhythm forms, travel, labor, return. Mountains, forests, far valleys, the Cyrenaean hind, a golden deer sacred to Artemis, leads him on a year-long chase through cold uplands and shadowed woods, the kind of task that is more patience than force. Cleaning the Augean stables sounds comic, but it is still a day of back-breaking work, redirecting rivers, standing in mud while the water roars past. Fetching Cerberus from Hades brings him down to that underworld you've just visited, past the ferries and fields, to wrestle a 3-headed dog, and then, politely, put it back. Through it all, Heracles is both more than human and very recognizably human. He is strong enough to hold up the sky for a while, yet still loses his temper, still makes mistakes, still suffers the consequences of promises and oaths. The Greeks saw in him a kind of rough mirror, a hero who keeps going, even when the tasks repeat, even when the road is long, even when the gods are only half on his side. As you'll drift further into the story, other heroes will appear, but few will walk as far or carry as much as the man in the lion skin, heading out once more at dawn.
Heracles walks off to another sunrise, and the path of heroes feels very long. But tonight we're going to follow a different road, a quieter one, where the danger is real, yet the edges of the story feel strangely soft, like a dream you half remember when you wake. Perseus begins as so many heroes do, with a problem. He is young, alive, inconvenient. His grandfather, having heard one of those unsettling prophecies about being killed by a descendant, locks his daughter away. Apparently, in Greek mythology, this is considered a reasonable parenting strategy. Zeus visits as a shower of gold. A child is born, and the king, later in charge of Perseus's life, decides that the simplest way to remove him is to give him an impossible task. "Bring me," he says, "the head of Medusa." Not a lock of hair, not a tooth, the whole head, from a monster whose gaze turns living bodies into stone. You can imagine Perseus, understandably distressed, nodding politely while wondering how long he has to live. In any case, the gods are paying attention.
Athena, cool and deliberate, and Hermes, lighter on his feet, decide this particular mortal will not walk alone. They do not fight the battle for him. That would be too simple. Instead, they turn the quest into a carefully prepared journey. Hermes gives him winged sandals, so each step is more like a thought than a footfall. Athena offers a polished shield, bright as still water, so clear it can hold a reflection, like another, safer world. Other gifts join them: a curved sword sharp enough to ignore details, a cap of invisibility, a special bag to hold whatever he dares to bring back. So Perseus goes north, then farther, past the edge of familiar maps to the place where the Gorgons sleep. The approach is not a charge. It is a slow, tense walk through a landscape already defeated. Men, beasts, perhaps even careless gods stand frozen as statues, caught mid-breath, mid-shout, mid-prayer. No sky, no sea, no sound of birds, just that quiet field of almost people and the faint rasp of Perseus's sandals brushing the air. He does not look at Medusa, not directly, not once. He moves by reflection, watching her in the mirror of Athena's shield, as if seeing her in a story rather than in the world. Snakes for hair, wings, a face that once was human and is now something else entirely. He edges closer, guided by the gods, by his own careful breathing, by the knowledge that one glance would end everything. The beheading itself happens quickly. A single stroke, a rush of motion, a sound you don't need to hear. More important is what follows. From the neck, Pegasus, the winged horse, rises into the air, and Medusa's head, separated from her body, does not stop working. Even in death, her gaze holds its power. The head becomes a portable storm, a symbol you can carry, danger on one side, protection on the other. He slips it into the bag and turns away, and from then on the story moves with a different rhythm. On his way home, he finds Andromeda chained to a rock, offered to a sea monster as payment for someone else's pride. He does not wrestle the beast for hours. He simply unveils the head, and stone solves what words and weapons cannot. Later, when he returns to the king who sent him to die, the same silent solution appears. The court becomes a gallery. Eventually, though, even a hero grows tired of carrying that kind of power. Perseus gives the head to Athena. She sets it on her shield, the aegis, turning the face of a monster into a protective emblem for cities and soldiers and frightened sailors looking up at temple walls. A terror becomes a symbol becomes a kind of armor. And as you let the myths unfold, you can feel how the Greeks understood that even the worst things, once faced and held at the right distance, might guard you rather than destroy you. Somewhere beyond this, other heroes are already waiting in the wings, and other clever gods are polishing new tools for them to borrow.
By the time your mind reaches Athens in this quiet part of the story, the city is living under a shadow. Every so often, a ship must leave its harbor, carrying a tribute it never wants to send. 7 young men and 7 young women sailed off to Crete, not for a festival, not for a wedding, for a monster.
In the depths of King Minos's palace waits the Minotaur, half man, half bull, kept in a twisting stone maze designed so that once you go in, you do not come back out. The Athenians live with this arrangement the way people live with a chronic ache. They keep going, but the dread is always there in the background. Into this steps Theseus, a prince of Athens, who, in other stories, can be a bit impulsive, but here appears with a strangely calm resolve. He volunteers to be part of the next group of youths, not because he's been chosen, but because he chooses himself, deciding that someone has to end the cycle. Not a speechifying hero with trumpets and banners, just a young man who looks at the pattern of suffering and quietly says, "Enough." When the ship reaches Crete, the world tilts. The visitors become prisoners. The palace is huge, bright, and decorative on the outside, but everyone is understandably distressed about what lies beneath. There, Theseus meets Ariadne, Minos's daughter, who falls for him, or for the possibility that the story might finally change. Apparently, in Greek mythology, falling in love with complicated foreigners is a recurring hobby. Ariadne gives him a gift that is not a magic sword, not divine armor, but a ball of thread. He is to tie one end at the entrance of the labyrinth, then slowly unwind it as he walks. In any case, it's a very low-tech miracle. The maze becomes less a building and more a picture of confusion itself. Looping paths, dead ends, the feeling you might be walking in circles inside your own head. The thread is memory, guidance, the promise that even if you lose all sense of direction, there will be one thin line leading back. Theseus goes in. Stone walls, echoes, his own footsteps for company. Not the noisy kind of horror with constant attacks, but the quiet kind where you don't know where anything is, including yourself. Somewhere in that stillness, the Minotaur waits. When they finally meet, the story does mention a fight, and Theseus kills the creature, but the emphasis falls less on the blows and more on the fact that in the end, the monster is just one body in one room. The labyrinth around it had been doing most of the work. Following the thread, he retraces his steps, gathers the other youths, and escapes with Ariadne onto the night sea. For a moment, it looks like a clean victory. Monster slain, maze solved, new life ahead. But Greek heroes are rarely allowed tidy endings. On the island of Naxos, Theseus abandons Ariadne while she sleeps for reasons that shift from version to version: divine command, cold feet, or simple carelessness. She'll have her own strange consolation later, involving Dionysus, wine, and a crown of stars. Theseus sails on, forgetting one important detail. When he left Athens, his father, Aegis, had told him to change the ship's black sails to white if he survived. A simple signal, a small kindness for a worried parent. In the rush of success, Theseus forgets. The black sails stay. Aegis, watching from a cliff above the harbor, sees the black against the water and assumes his son is dead. Grief pulls him into the sea that will bear his name. So the story ends with a hero who has done what he set out to do. He has ended the tribute, slain the Minotaur, walked back out of the confusion, but who leaves behind a trail of sorrow, a deserted woman on a shore, a dead father in the waves, a city that has won
and lost at the same time. You'll drift listening, and you can feel how the Greeks used this to say that courage is necessary but never pure, that even the cleverest thread can't tie up every loose end. And somewhere beyond Theseus's ship, beyond the cliffs of Athens and the quiet cooling stones of the empty labyrinth, other paths are already being laid out, roads that will lead not just through mythic monsters, but toward a very real city of marble and smoke, where ordinary people will try to navigate their own mazes without any thread at all.
We're going to follow another ship cutting across that dark water, a ship that carries not one hero, but many, all crowded together under a creaking mast and an impossible promise. The story begins quietly enough. A young man named Jason comes back to his homeland, Iolcus, to claim a throne that should have been his by birth. Not a glittering, safe throne, of course. This is Greek mythology. His uncle Peleus has taken the crown and, understandably distressed at the sight of the rightful heir standing in front of him, decides on a very traditional solution: send Jason far away on a quest that no one could possibly survive. The prize is the golden fleece hanging in a sacred grove in distant Colchis at the far edge of the known world. Not just far in miles, but far in imagination, a place where the map blurs and sea monsters, storms, and strange gods all seem a little closer to the surface. In any case, Jason agrees. Heroes tend to do that. To reach this almost storybook object, he needs a ship, and not just any ship. The Argo is built, long and lean, its prow fitted with a beam of oak from the sacred grove at Dodona, where the wood can whisper prophecies. So you have a boat that talks, quietly but still. Apparently, in Greek mythology, even the furniture has opinions. Around this floating oracle gathers a small crowd of heroes: Heracles with his lion skin, Orpheus with his music, the twins Castor and Polydeuces, and many others whose names wash past you like waves. It's one of the earliest team-up stories, everyone squeezed onto a single deck, sharing food, boredom, and the slow, uncertain rhythm of travel. Their voyage is not one great battle, but a chain of episodes. Harpies torment an old seer until the Argonauts chase them off. The ship edges through the clashing rocks, two cliffs that slam together like a giant pair of jaws, guided by a sacrificed dove and a quick burst of rowing. There are islands with strange customs, sudden storms, and brief flickering friendships left behind on distant shores. Nothing lingers for long. They arrive, they help or offend, they leave. In Colchis, the story narrows. Jason meets Medea, daughter of King Aeetes, priestess of Hecate, expert in herbs, spells, and difficult decisions. The gods nudge her heart, and she falls in love with this foreign hero, who, frankly, would not last 5 minutes without her. She teaches him how to yoke fire-breathing bulls, how to sow dragon's teeth and survive the armed warriors that spring from the soil, how to lull the serpent that guards the fleece. Magic, cleverness, and betrayal carry them homeward. Medea helps Jason steal the fleece, flee her father, and slip past more dangers on the return. Jason wins his throne. The quest, on paper, is a success. But heroic journeys do not guarantee heroic endings. Later, when Jason abandons Medea for a more advantageous marriage, the quiet unraveling begins, and the price of that long voyage comes due in tragedy. You'll drift from this shining fleece toward darker domestic rooms, where the gods watch as closely as ever, and where the next part of the story will ask what happens after the adventure ends and ordinary life begins again. We're going to drift from private heartbreak back up to the bright, echoing halls of the gods, where one glittering party and one small piece of fruit will, apparently in Greek mythology, be enough to send thousands of mortals to war. The scene opens with a wedding. Not the nervous mortal kind with last-minute seating charts and a missing cousin. This is the marriage of Peleus, a respectable human hero, and Thetis, a sea goddess whose very presence smells faintly of salt and storm. Zeus himself has arranged it, partly out of generosity, partly because a prophecy warned that any son of Thetis would surpass his father, and Zeus has had enough of overthrow scenarios for one eternity. In any case, a mortal husband seems safer. The wedding is magnificent. The gods come glittering down from Olympus, robes bright, cups full, music winding through the air like a soft tide. You can imagine the tables, golden platters, endless wine, sea nymphs drifting at the edges like pale waves. For a moment, the world is in balance. Sky, sea, and earth are all represented. Gods and mortals share one long, improbable feast. Almost everyone is invited. Almost. One goddess is left off the guest list. Eris, the personification of strife. She is understandably distressed when she realizes there will be dancing and wine and elaborate toasts, and none of it will involve her. Being the goddess of discord, she does not send a polite note. She arrives anyway, quiet as a shadow, and rolls a single golden apple into the middle of the hall. On it are 3 simple words, "For the fairest." Not a curse, not a thunderbolt, just a question. But in a world of proud immortals, that is more than enough. Hera, queen of the gods, reaches for it. Athena, grey-eyed goddess of wisdom and war, claims it too. Aphrodite, soft, smiling power of desire, will not be left out. 3 goddesses, 1 apple. No volunteers to judge. Zeus, having survived one divine uprising and several marital arguments, wisely refuses to choose between them. Instead, the decision is outsourced. Down on the slopes near Troy, a young man named Paris is living a very quiet life as a shepherd, unaware that his family are Trojan royals and that his cradle once came with ominous prophecies attached. He is good at tending animals, less experienced at handling goddesses. The 3 descend to him, not unusual in divine circles, and the beauty contest begins. Each offers a bribe, because even immortals like to tilt the scales. Hera promises power, a kingdom vast and secure. Athena offers victory in war and the cool, sharp wisdom to wield it. Aphrodite simply smiles and promises him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chooses desire. He gives the apple to Aphrodite, and in that quiet pastoral moment the future shudders. The woman he has been promised is Helen of Sparta, already married, already queen, already the center of too many watchful eyes. When Paris later walks into her world, guided by a goddess and by his own choice, you'll drift from this calm hillside into the slow ignition of the Trojan War, where wounded pride, broken oaths, and old divine rivalries will all come due on a single crowded shore.
So Paris walks into Helen's quiet, ordered world, and we're going to follow what happens when one private choice pulls almost every famous name in Greece toward a single shore. Not all at once, not in a rush of trumpets, but slowly, over time, as oaths are remembered, favors are called in, and old grudges stretch and awake. Menelaus, understandably distressed to find his wife gone and his honor in question, turns to his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, who is wealthier, louder, and very fond of command. The former suitors of Helen had once sworn to defend her marriage, so Agamemnon sends messengers out across the Greek world, knocking on palace doors, reminding kings and heroes of promises made when the wine was flowing more freely. In any case, they come. Long-suffering Menelaus, stern Agamemnon, clever Odysseus, reluctantly dragged from his new baby and quiet island, Ajax the huge, Nestor the old and talkative, and Achilles, young, brilliant, and already half-tired of other people's leadership. This gathering of ships and tempers is impressive. It is also, apparently, in Greek mythology, a recipe for 10 years of stalemate. The war that follows is not one single blazing clash where everything is decided in an afternoon, not the tidy version you might expect, but a long, repetitive grind of raids on nearby towns, skirmishes at the walls, duels between champions, and endless councils where the same arguments are made in slightly different words. You can imagine the rhythm, seasons turning, armor polished and dented and polished again, temporary truces for burials, then more fighting. The gods watch, interfere, take sides, switch sides. Heroes win glory in one moment and lose friends in the next. Odysseus plots, Agamemnon offends, and Achilles, the greatest fighter on the Greek side, spends a famous stretch of the war not fighting at all, angry in his tent over an insult to his honor and his prize. Out of this long, circling struggle, one duel glows with a different light. Achilles against Hector, Prince of Troy. Hector is not a treacherous seducer or a boastful bully. He is a family man, a defender, a person who would probably prefer a quiet life but walks back to the walls because someone has to. Achilles is blazing, terrifying, half divine and full of grief for his fallen friend. When they meet outside the city, it is not just strength against strength, but two ideas of duty colliding, and for a moment the story pauses to show you the shared humanity of enemies who both know they may not walk away. In the end, it is not raw force that breaks Troy, but a piece of theater. Odysseus suggests building a huge wooden horse, hollow inside, left as a gift, while the Greek fleet pretends to sail away. The Trojans argue about what to do, as tired people do when they have been afraid for too long. They bring the horse into the city. That night, when the celebrations fade, hidden warriors climb out, open the gates, and let the returning army in. Troy falls, not with a single shout, but with many separate small failures of judgment, courage, and luck. You might think that is the end of the story. City burned, war finished, curtain down. Not quite. The surviving heroes scatter into the world, each carrying their own unfinished business. Agamemnon sails home to a palace where his wife has not been waiting patiently. Menelaus must somehow bring Helen back to a world that remembers the cost of her beauty. And Odysseus, who thought up the horse, discovers that going home can take longer than any siege, as the sea, the gods, and his own choices stretch a simple voyage into 10 wandering years. When you follow him out onto the open water, away from the smoke of Troy, you'll drift into a different kind of trial altogether. where the monsters are fewer, the islands stranger, and the question of who you are when you finally reach your own door is not so easily answered.
We're going not into another battle line, but into a long, drifting maze of sea and memory, where home is always on the horizon and never quite in reach. Odysseus leaves Troy as a victor, but he has made an enemy of Poseidon, the god of the sea, by blinding the god's Cyclops son, and apparently, in Greek mythology, that sort of thing does not speed up your travel time. Instead of a street sail to Ithaca, the voyage stretches into years. Not a map with clear ports, but a string of dreamlike islands, each one a little pocket universe with its own rules, its own slow enchantment. The gods are not done playing with him, and the sea is their favorite board. On one rocky shore there is the Cyclops, not just a monster with one eye, but a kind of walking cave, a shepherd who lives alone with his silent flock. You can imagine the quiet inside that skull, and the sudden brightness when Odysseus's trick takes his sight. On another island waits Circe, the sorceress, who turns men into pigs, not out of chaos, but with a sort of bored, practiced magic, as if this is simply how she passes the time. They sail past the sirens, whose song is not loud or shrieking, but soft and precise, promising knowledge, promising that if you just stay, you will understand everything. Odysseus has himself tied to the mast so he can listen without jumping, a very human compromise between curiosity and survival. Then there is the narrow strait of Scylla and Charybdis, not two cartoon monsters, but a cliffside shadow that snatches men from the deck and a dark whirlpool that opens like a breathing wound in the sea. In any case, the strangest stop is almost the quietest. On Calypso's island, time folds in on itself. No storms, no battles, no urgent quests, just a cave, a nymph, and an immortal offer. Stay here, be young forever, forget Ithaca. Years pass, and every day is the same smooth stone. Yet Odysseus sits on the shore and looks toward a world that will wrinkle him and one day end him. He chooses that instead. While he wonders, another kind of patience is taking shape at home. In Ithaca, Penelope weaves a funeral shroud by day and secretly unweaves it by night, promising to choose a new husband when the work is finished. It is a quiet rebellion, a slow refusal, a way of holding a door open in her mind. You'll drift with her through those nights, the loom clicking softly as suitors feast and boast in the hall. When Odysseus finally returns, he does not rush in with trumpets. He comes disguised as a beggar, bent and dusty, testing the edges of his own life before stepping fully back into it. His son, Telemachus, sees a stranger first, then a father. The recognition is not a lightning bolt, but a series of small, careful questions, like touching something fragile to see if it will break. When Penelope, who has trained herself not to believe every rumor of his return, needs proof that goes deeper than a face, she sets a quiet test involving their marriage bed, carved from a rooted olive tree that cannot be moved. When Odysseus describes it, the circle closes, the wandering man and the waiting woman, the storms and the loom, the gods and the mortals, all gathered back into one room. Not with fireworks, but with furniture, which, again, is not unusual in divine circles.
That homecoming, with its disguises and slow recognitions, became a kind of template for later stories about return, identity, and the strange feeling of coming back different to a place that looks the same. And as the Greeks told and retold the Odyssey, they also imagined what waited beyond any homecoming at all, the world of the dead beneath their feet, where heroes, cowards, and ordinary farmers shared a different kind of stillness. Let the myths unfold a little further, and we'll follow them down there next.
And as those stories of homecoming and the long road back slowly settled into the Greek imagination, something else began to shift. Not the underworld itself, but the way people talked and thought about the gods who ruled above and below. Tonight, we're going to stay with that turning point for a moment in the quiet space where myth begins to lean toward philosophy. From the very beginning, there was never one tidy, official version of any story. No single book you could open and say, "This is Greek mythology, final edition." Instead, you had wandering bards singing one way in a mountain village, solemn priests reciting another at a temple, and clever playwrights in Athens changing details to get a better laugh or a sharper tear from the crowd. Apparently, in Greek mythology, continuity was more of a suggestion than a rule. In one town, Artemis might be the wild huntress of the forests. In another, she was a gentle protector of young girls. Heracles could be a violent, drunken, strong man in a comedy, then a suffering, almost holy figure in a tragedy the next year. The same heroes, the same gods, the same monsters, but rearranged, softened, sharpened, depending on what a particular city, festival, or audience needed at that moment in time. Slowly, some listeners began to do something dangerous. They started asking whether Zeus really hurled lightning in jealousy, or whether that was a way of talking about storms and power and the sudden reversals of fortune. Early thinkers, like the poet Theagenes of Rhegium, suggested that the battles of gods might secretly be about the struggle of natural forces, fire and water, earth and sky, dressed up as divine family drama. Others simply raised an eyebrow at the gods' behavior and wondered if these stories should be taken literally, or as warnings, or as slightly exaggerated gossip about the universe. By the time you reach philosophers like Plato, the change is very clear. He still uses myths, strange afterlife journeys, chariots of the soul, stories about a lost island called Atlantis. Let the myths unfold in his dialogues, and they look familiar, but the purpose has shifted. They are illustrations now, gentle thought experiments, pointing toward an invisible, more perfect reality. The true divine, he hints, is not a quarrelsome Zeus with thunderbolts, but something calmer and more abstract, a goodness and order beyond any single god's temper. Yet in the cities, the old stories kept working, not as literal belief alone, but as public language. Myths were carved on temple walls, shouted in theatre competitions, woven into processions and sacrifices and civic pride. You might doubt whether Ares personally enjoyed your local war and still march in a festival held in his name, because the story tied you to your neighbors, your ancestors, your place in the world. Over time, the volume of literal belief lowered, like a chorus stepping back from the front of the stage. The gods did not vanish, they changed clothes, they moved into philosophy, into art, into quiet reflections about fate and justice and the soul. You'll drift with them soon enough into the underworld again, where philosophers and storytellers alike imagined what waited when even questioning had to fall silent. They also didn't fall completely silent. The old gods kept talking, just in different voices, and some of those voices still wander quietly through your own day. You carry them around in your mouth, in your thoughts, even in the labels on heavy bookshelves. Take Atlas, not just a book of maps, but a titan, shoulders permanently occupied, holding up the sky after losing a war to Zeus. Every time you see an atlas on a shelf, it's a tiny echo of that punishment made into something politely useful. Or Titanic, now a word for anything very large, but once the name of those same ancient titans, the first great powers who were, understandably, distressed when Zeus and his siblings took over the world. Narcissism comes from the boy who fell in love with his own reflection and wasted away beside a pool. Herculean effort remembers Heracles and his exhausting list of labors. You don't have to believe in sea monsters and thunderbolts to notice that apparently, in Greek mythology, the dictionary is still under divine management. The stories also keep resurfacing in pictures and performances. Renaissance painters filled ceilings with Olympian family portraits, Zeus on clouds, Athena in armor, a very disgruntled Hera nearby. Sculptors carved Laocoon and his sons wrestling those impossible sea serpents. Later, composers turned Orpheus and Eurydice into operas, stretching one backward glance into hours of music. Modern novels send Odysseus into space or give Medusa her own point of view. Films retell the Trojan War with more hair products and fewer accurate helmets. In any case, the same heroes, monsters, and gods keep being hired for new roles, like an acting troupe that never quite retires, only changes costumes and lighting. Some people go further and say these myths are not just old entertainment, but patterns of human behavior, not scientific diagrams, but recurring shapes. Parents who fear their children will replace them, like Uranus and Cronus. Journeys that take far longer than planned, like Odysseus's long, salt-sticky return. Temptations that are opened just to peak, like Pandora's jar. Not the strict kind of psychology with charts and tests, but a softer map of how people dream, fear, and hope. As you lie there, you might notice which figures linger for you. Perhaps Persephone, moving in cycles between light and dark, feels a little like your own seasons of energy and rest. Perhaps Prometheus, stealing fire for humans and paying for it, reminds you of someone who gives too much. Or you may simply like Athena, calm in a storm of bad decisions. You don't have to solve any of it tonight. Let the myths unfold without needing an answer. Let words like Atlas and Titanic float past as harmless debris from an ancient shipwreck of stories. Slowly, your own thoughts can drift the same way, touching these old shapes and then moving on. Because the echoes don't end with language or paintings. They follow us down into darker places too, into the quiet spaces where people have always wondered what comes after the last breath. And there, the Greeks built something very specific, very strange, and not entirely comforting, waiting just beyond the edge of sleep.
And so, from that not entirely comforting underworld, you can slowly look back over the path we've walked together, like turning your head on a pillow and seeing the whole dream at once. It began with almost nothing. No sky, no sea, no light or dark, just chaos, the quiet before everything. Then Gaia, the broad earth, and Uranus, the sky pressed too close, their children wedged in the dark between them. From that cramped beginning came Titans with long grudges, and then the Olympian gods, who solved their family problems with a war and some strategic lightning. We watched Kronos swallow his children, which is apparently, in Greek mythology, a reasonable parenting strategy. We saw Zeus grow up in hiding, overthrow his father, and divide the world into sky, sea, and underworld. Not a gentle promotion, but a rearrangement by storm. The great gods took their thrones, each with a domain, a symbol, and a set of stories that explained why the world could be so beautiful and so unpredictable at the same time. Then the focus narrowed, from the universe itself to Olympus, to cities and temples, down into single houses and single hearts. A god in the storm, a goddess in the olive tree, but also a quiet household shrine, a whispered prayer before sleep, a small offering left so that tomorrow might be a little kinder. Tonight we're going from that vast mythic ceiling down to the mattress under your shoulders. Along the way, the old gods faded. Philosophers argued, new faiths arrived, statues crumbled, and yet the shapes remained. Jealous gods, clever mortals, monsters at the edge of the map. Let the myths unfold in your mind now, not as lessons you must memorize, but as soft companions, giving you images for feelings that don't always have tier names. You don't need all the names, or who begat whom, or which hero stabbed which monster on which island. In any case, even the ancient poets disagreed. What matters is that you've walked, slowly and safely, through a very long story, from chaos to here. You can let the details blur at the edges. You'll drift with only a few gentle shapes left, sky and earth, gods and humans, fear and courage, loss and homecoming. And as those shapes grow quieter, we can turn from Greek shores towards another world entirely, where real streets and real hunger waited beneath very different gods, in a city called Rome, still awake while you fall asleep.
And as Rome waits off stage, you can come back, very slowly, to the room you're actually in. Not marble, not torchlight, just your ceiling, your walls, the familiar weight of your blankets resting over you like a small private sky. The world outside these four walls can be as noisy as it likes. In here, it's just the dim light, the quiet air, and the sound of your own breathing, moving in and out like a very patient tide. Tonight, we're going from distant shores back to this exact spot. Your pillow, your hands, the way the mattress holds your weight. The myths are still there, but they've stepped back, the way stars seem to retreat when the clouds move in. Zeus and Hera, Athena and Apollo, all those heroes and monsters, are now as far away as constellations you can't quite name, faint shapes at the edge of thought. Up on Olympus, the noise has faded too. Thunder is put away in some celestial cupboard. No lightning, no oaths, no surprise transformations, just a sky god who has finally run out of speeches for the evening. Athena closes the last scroll, sets down the spear, and lets the city guard itself for a while. Even Ares, apparently, in Greek mythology, must reach a point where there are no more battles scheduled, and he has to tolerate peace and a pillow.
Hermes, who never stops moving, unlaces those winged sandals and leaves them by the door of some cloud-bright room. Not the dramatic entrance kind of door, just an ordinary one, quietly shut. Somewhere Poseidon lets the waves roll on without commentary, and Hades, who has seen everything, turns down whatever passes for a lamp in the underworld. The gods do not vanish, they just grow drowsy, the whole divine world sinking into a slower rhythm, like your thoughts when you're almost, but not quite asleep. Stories do this too. They arrive bright and detailed, full of names and motives, and, not unusual in divine circles, a slightly excessive number of grudges. Then, as time goes on, they soften. Edges blur, faces turn to symbols, and what's left is the feeling of them, courage and fear, love and loss, the strange comfort of knowing that people long before you lay awake, understandably distressed by their own lives, and let the myths unfold in their minds until sleep finally took over. From chaos and Gaia to Olympian feasts to quiet household prayers before a small fire, these tales have drifted through thousands of years, changing shape but keeping that same gentle job, to sit beside the human mind at night and keep it company. You're part of that now, another listener in a long, unbroken line, breathing in the dark while the old stories move just under the surface. If you're still awake, and only if this brought you a little peace, you can always save this for another night, or subscribe and find your way back to more